For some reason, it possibly was in the act of installing Wireshark, but my Zoom crashed on my other computer. Sorry about that. But I'm just looking up. Bear with me because I want to look at the U of H dates real quick for this semester. I don't have internet access on my laptop. That's what happened. I wonder what happened to it. Give me just a minute. I want to try to reconnect on this other laptop before I give up. Just go to my backup here. Turn on the Wi-Fi here. Give me just a second. I'm going to go check something. Not sure why it shut it down here. Oh, well, that's okay. Let me switch then. Just leave the computer up there. Let's go ahead and finish through chapter 10 then. Sorry about that technical glitching there. Set this down here. That really isn't very useful up there. I'll have to do some experimentation later when I have some time. It's possible that the act of trying to install Wireshark caused me to lose internet access, although I doubt it. I've done it many times before. Okay, got my second monitor on now. Sorry, it's taking just a bit. I just go ahead and share the main screen from here. In the interest of time. Academic calendar is probably what I should have looked at. Oh, there it is. Academic calendar. That's what I want. Okay, so let's see. Summer of 2020, our session 1 here, our last day of class. Looks like it's supposed to be June 29th. Is that correct? Yeah, so it's a little bit earlier. So yeah, it looks like June 29th is our last day of class. So hopefully that answers your questions. So between now and June 29th, need to try to get everything done. Let's see, that's Monday. So we will have a class tomorrow. So we'll get through chapter 10, get into chapter 11, finish up chapter 12 on the 29th, and then final exam. Yeah, it'll go through July 1st. I actually will probably give you a little bit longer time because I don't have to get the grades in that quickly, pretty quickly, but not quite that quickly. Let me see, what does it say? Yeah, so by July 1st, I should have that final exam up. And the July 1st, or the exam 3 in this class will be the easiest exam that you take.
Professor, are we also having any bonus assignments?
What's that?
Are we also having any bonus assignments?
There are some there, but I'm going to change them. And they're not going to be hard assignments. They'll be assignments that you can sit down and do within an hour. But mostly we're going to be going by whatever the grades were on the exams for this semester. Just because we couldn't do some of those assignments. I hate using one of these little touch pads and not a mouse, but I'm on a laptop here. And it's a backup laptop, so it's an older one with a little teeny touch pad. There we go. Trying to close everything on the screens. Gee whiz. Let me disconnect my VPN from the EILAB. That's probably what's slowing me down. No, I'm not connected. All right. Was connected at one point. It's just going super slow right now. Am I coming across choppy to you guys? I think my internet service there's something wrong with it. excuse me. Okay, so we were at about 19, slide 19, slide 20, somewhere around here, talking about fiber to the home, fiber to the curb. Started talking about wireless. I talked about WiMAX and how WiMAX is still available in some countries, but how Sprint killed it. The new wireless networking, as of the writing of this PowerPoint, was 4G LTE. Now we have 5G coming out. Does anybody in here happen to have a 5G capable device? And what do you know about 5G, if anything?
How do you know if you have a 5G device?
You would know because it would cost a lot more and you would have paid for it specifically, and it would have been a thing that was advertised. They've only been out for a couple of months. Like the Galaxy S20, for example, is 5G. I believe the newest Apple has 5G, but they have non-5G versions. The difference basically is that 5G is a different set of frequencies. Keep in mind that frequencies are set by entities within the different countries, the FCC, and you can't just use any frequencies. You have to actually get licenses to use certain frequencies. So it's a big deal when these new frequencies come out. And the 5G is actually a grouping of multiple frequencies. It's kind of, again, like a protocol suite. It's not a specific frequency range. It encompasses some of the existing telephone frequency ranges, as well as Wi-Fi frequency ranges, as well as a new 60 gigahertz range. Your 5G capable phone will use any of those available ranges to attempt to communicate. But it's not really rolled out in very many places. The biggest problem with 5G is that you need to physically be close to those antennas. So until there's antennas everywhere in every building and on every other house in every neighborhood, we won't really see a lot of 5G yet. 4G LTE, which again, LTE is just a marketing term referring to the frequencies. The frequencies that are used for different cell phone carriers range anywhere from 700 to 2.7 megahertz. I think that my Sprint phone's typically on 1850 megahertz. Satellite, I mentioned that before. It's primarily used by rural customers, or used when you're in a very remote area, or if you happen to be on a spaceship. You have what's called high latency issues because satellites, and this is why I'd ask you to do a little bit of research and look at that little networking assignment that included looking up the transatlantic cable, but also looking up geostationary or geosynchronous Earth orbit satellites. Arthur C. Clarke, an author, figured out a long time ago that we could use satellites up in space and bounce radio waves off of them to send signals all the way around the Earth. The problem with the Earth is that radio signals don't go through it. So if we want to send signals around the Earth, we either need to send them on a cable, which is buried underneath the ocean, the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. There's many hundreds of cables, or use satellite, which is what most communication from one continent or from the eastern to the western hemisphere is using satellite. But because those satellites are 22,200 miles up, and the reason they have to be that high is so that when they're orbiting the Earth, they're orbiting the Earth at the same relative speed that the Earth is spinning on its rotational axis, so that it appears to stay stationary in the sky. Not all satellites are stationary, as you know. The ISS, for example, which is only about between 200 and 300 miles up, is not stationary. We can communicate with it, but you have to have equipment that is much more complex. The reason that geostationary satellite is more desirable is because all you have to have is a very inexpensive satellite dish, a little 18-inch dish that has no mechanics on it. You mount it and you specifically point it to a certain spot in the sky. And that spot in the sky, if you had Superman vision, you could see a satellite there. They're typically towards the west, towards the south and towards the west in this part of our world. Satellites are very, very fast, but it takes a long time, even at the speed of light. Light travels fastest in the vacuum of space, but even once it hits space, it's still only going the speed of light. Radio waves travel the speed of light because they are basically energy just like light is. But even at that speed, to get data from a satellite up to a satellite and then back down from a satellite introduces latency between a quarter and a half second delay, and that's just too long. So there are issues with using satellites. There's pros and cons to it. When we need temporary connections, when we need rural connections, we use satellite. I wanted to talk about these entities here. There is one entity that's not in the notes that I need to bring up. Internet governance. Who controls the internet? The internet is not well controlled, and that's mostly because the internet can't be easily controlled because there's no definition of what the internet is. No specific boundaries of the internet. Anybody that wants to can attach to the internet, either wirelessly or wired. The Internet Society is made up of several boards or committees within the Internet Society: the Internet Architectural Board, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IESG, the IRTF. These are several committees which individuals or companies can belong to, and they can make technical recommendations. That's what they're for. They make recommendations mostly with respect to protocols, what protocol should look like, or what email structure should look like, or what HTML should look like. That's, again, these are protocols. Some of them also make recommendations as to what is appropriate and not appropriate to have on the internet, but usually that's governed by the individual governing bodies of each country. Some things, as I mentioned yesterday, that are illegal in certain countries content-wise are legal in other countries. There's an organization here, the ICANN, the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. They used to be the sole provider, the sole coordinator, I should say, the sole coordinator for all of the IP addresses in the world. You can go look up those IP addresses at ARIN.net. They're affiliated with ICANN, but they've given up that control because they were required to at some point. Different countries got together, usually through an organization like the UN, and they'd say, well, we need to relieve or remove some of the control of the internet from the United States, because primarily the USA is where the internet began, and the USA is where it predominantly was up until about the early to mid 2000s. These days, the USA networking only comprises between 20 and 22% of the internet. It's definitely an international situation now. So most of these associations and boards and groups, they all start with the letter I because they're all international. Now I'm going to ask a couple questions on the test. This is exam 3, by the way. And so you need to be responsible for knowing what each of these groups here generally is responsible for. And you can just simply Google for these. What's the ISOC do? What's IRTF do? I'm not going to go into them right now, but I am going to point out one organization which is probably the most powerful and the only organization in the world, in my opinion, that can really actually govern and control the internet. Because the internet is international, again, there's really no way to control the internet if somebody is attacking you, for example, your company from another country, from a Starbucks in another country, or another network in another country. It would be very difficult to prosecute and be very difficult to apply your laws in the United States, for example, to somebody doing something in another country. This is a problem. One area where a real problem has occurred is domain names. Who is allowed to use what domain names? domain name disputes. That's one of the biggest issues, other than the security. One of the biggest issues with normal business operations on the internet is who gets to use what domain name. If I decide, hey, let's say I'm Domino's Pizza, because this happened with Domino's. So I'm going to go register the name Domino's for Domino's Pizza so people can go to my website and buy pizza. If somebody else has registered that domain name and they happen to also be in another country and they registered Domino's, I can't very easily sue that organization or that end user, that person, and say, hey, you're not really entitled to use that name Domino's, because let's pretend that that person has nothing to do with Domino's Pizza. In fact, this happened. There was somebody that registered pizza.com, and Domino's argued, well, we're the predominant pizza company in the world, but that wasn't really specific enough because they're not called pizza, they're called Domino's. But they did have their name taken away from them, or they tried to register Domino's for Domino's.com. They tried to sue the entity that registered it. The entity was in another country, and it would have been fine. They were basically holding it for ransom. This is what happens a lot, is domain names get held for ransom. So what was happening back in the late 90s and early 2000s was that if you were you used your company name as your domain name and you forgot to pay the bill for your domain name, because you have to register your domains with registrars. So make sure you know what a registrar is, specifically a network domain name registrar. There used to just be one in the world. The original registrar was called Network Solutions, and they still exist. They're the original registrar. At some point, the government, the United States government, realized, hey, you can't be the only registrar. We need to give that control over to other countries in the world, because they need to be able to manage their own domain names. And it's not fair for you to have that monopoly. And they were rather expensive. It was $75 a year. So there are many other registrars now, like GoDaddy, for example. They're probably the most popular because they market heavily. So anyway, there are, or were, a lot of domain name disputes, and there still are a lot of domain name disputes. Sometimes a company breaks up. One partner of a company goes somewhere and he decides, well, I'm going to register that company name, or that company name belongs to me, that domain name, I should say. And they have a disagreement. You can try to hash that out in court, in US court, but again, if it's an international company, there's not really an international court that will deal with this. The registrars don't want to deal with it either. GoDaddy and Enom and Network Solutions, they will not deal with domain name disputes because they end up getting sued. They end up getting pulled into court, and they don't want to have to deal with that. So usually when you sign up for their services, you agree that you will hold them harmless, you will indemnify them from doing anything or being required to do anything if you find that your domain name is violating some rules, or somebody's tried to take it, or somebody's trying to take it from you. So there is an organization. This is the organization that I mentioned earlier that I believe is one of the most powerful organizations in the world. It's called WIPO. It stands for World Intellectual Property Organization. Their primary job, although you can read through their website and try to figure out what they do based on, this about WIPO, but basically they're there to handle international domain name disputes. And I'll give you a quick little story if I've got some time here. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time because we had some technical glitching there, but I registered the domain name of Collins.com many years ago because my son's name is Colin. So I registered Collins.com. They said, hey, Colin, you can use this domain name when you get older. And he says, okay, yeah, whatever. He's 26 years old. He still never used it. But I kept getting calls and emails from various different entities saying, hey, we'd be interested in using your domain name. We'd like to sell it. And I thought, well, sure, Colin's not using it. How much do you want to offer for it? And they would respond back, were, $50, $100, not very much. And I would try to get information from, like, who are you? And when I started asking more information about who they were, the responses or the information, the communication stopped. Then it would start up again a couple months later, and it was always from a different entity. And they would say something like, "Well, we make shoes," or we're a small company. Turns out that Collins is a part of a large clothing group in Turkey. They're basically the Levi's of Turkey, or the Calvin Klein of Turkey. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them or not, but they're a large company, and they have a line of jeans called Collins. They don't sell yet in the United States. They sell everywhere else except for the United States. You can go to collins.com.br and all these different other countries and see that they're selling there. So they were essentially lying. They were pretending to be somebody else. They were hiding who they were. I found out who they were, realized they were a large company. Said, okay, that's fine. You can have collins.com, but I want more money for that. So I want $50,000 for that. So I asked Colin, I said, how much is it going to cost you to go to college, to finish college? He says, about $50,000. So I said, let's ask him for $50,000, which was perfectly legal for me to do. They said, no, that's ridiculous. We're not going to pay that. We're going to sue you. And I said, well, that's fine. You're in Turkey. I'm in the United States. Do whatever you want. I didn't hear anything for a long time. And then I started getting these emails from this organization called WIPO. I'd never heard of WIPO. They haven't been around that long. And they were saying, we've received a domain name dispute from blah, blah, blah. If you don't answer this dispute within 30 days, we're going to take the domain name away from you. And I thought, well, this is BS. So I didn't pay attention to it the first couple of weeks. Well, I kept getting these warnings and notifications. And I thought, well, maybe this is legitimate. So I contacted my registrar, which was called bulkregister.com at the time. And I said, I'm getting these emails from an organization called WIPO saying they're going to take my domain name away. You're my registrar. Can they do that? And Bulk Register said, yes, absolutely, they can do that. You need to pay attention to that. WIPO is an organization that was formed. It's in Geneva, by the way. It's a nice neutral country, Switzerland. And it's an all volunteer type board, and they basically handle domain name disputes. And the reason that they have the power is because all of the registrars in the world decided, let's look to them for any domain name disputes, and whatever they say, whatever they figure out, they're supposed to be neutral. So whatever they figure out and whatever they tell us, that's what we will go with. So I went to the WIPO and I read up what I'm supposed to do. And their argument was that, well, you're not using that domain name, so we should be allowed to take it away. There was 3 things I had to prove or disprove or answer. I had to prove that I was using the domain. I wasn't using it with a website, but I was using it for email. That's why I quickly threw that up there, by the way, because there wasn't anything when you went to collins.com. So I made this just to satisfy that requirement that I'm using that domain name. Not for much, but I'm using it. Secondly, you had to prove that you were not using the domain to specifically keep it away from another company that had a similar trade name. Yeah, and then, Nissan.com, for example. I see, Santiago, you've mentioned. There's a lot of famous cases. You can go read up at the WIPO about several famous cases. This is just one that involved me personally. You had to prove that you were using the domain, had to prove that you had some reason to have registered the domain in the first place. Well, my son's name is Colin, and the domain name is collins.com, so I was able to show that. And thirdly, you had to show that you were not using the domain name specifically to be derogatory towards the other company. In other words, if I registered Nissan.com, for example, as Santiago said here, and I was Toyota, and I put on Nissan.com all kinds of terrible things about Nissan's a terrible car and a terrible company and you shouldn't do business with them, and here's a link to Toyota. In other words, if you were being derogatory, or if on my website I posted specifically somewhere here that said collins.com is either a bad company, or I've registered this domain simply for the purposes of trying to sell it to a company called Collins. In other words, domain squatting. They're trying to prevent what's called domain squatting or domain speculating. And I have a bunch of domains that I registered many years ago because I was doing domain speculating. So I speculated on some names, like this guy that registered pizza.com, for example. He ultimately made $7 million selling that name. So I've registered several domain names. I've been successful in selling 2 of the 44 domain names I registered, made about $100,000 total on both of them. But that was years and years ago, 20 years ago. I haven't sold any domain names since. It's not really it's not a thing you can do anymore, unfortunately. So WIPO, keep this in mind, WIPO, very powerful organization, only because, and understand why they're powerful, because the registrars have given this third-party neutral organization the ability to govern and regulate, tell them, not regulate, excuse me, to tell them who they believe should use that domain name or should have the use of that domain name. Excuse me, man. 4 volume controls on phones now. So you turn down one volume and there's another volume still on. So read up on WIPO. It's not in the book, not in the notes, but read up on WIPO. Make sure you understand who they are, what the intellectual property is, and understand what the value is. The value of a domain name, specifically a .com, is huge. If you're a big company, like Nissan, for example, or Toyota, or any of the car companies, or Exxon, if you don't have Nissan.com or Exxon.com, you're not considered a major player. You're not considered very professional. Yes, there's .org and .net, and those are for specific reasons. Although anybody can register .org and .net, there's also .biz and .us, and there's a bunch of other top-level domain names they've come out with. There's hundreds of them. You can Google for TLD list and get a long list of many domains. Some are country-based, but then a lot of them are these new top-level domains they've come out with, like .info, .hobby. There's even a .xxx if you're in the adult industry. And they're trying to drive companies and individuals towards using these alternative TLDs so that they don't have all these domain disputes. But companies are not going to use these alternative names. They want to use .com because it is a .com world. It's still a .com world. Marketing plays a big part of this. Even entities in other countries, like this Collins.com. They have Collins.com. I forgot what the 2-digit character was for in Turkey, but they don't want to be that. They just want to be Collins.com because that's considered global throughout the United States, throughout the earth, I mean, excuse me. This is a thing. Net neutrality was a thing a few years ago. It's not really a thing right now, and that was the argument that the internet or data on the internet should be treated equally regardless of what internet service provider you're using. It was a thing for a while. Our government in the United States said, yes, net neutrality is important. So you as a carrier, Sprint, for example, or AT&T, you cannot discriminate or throttle traffic based on who the customer is sending or receiving the traffic. In other words, if AT&T was your provider and they had a deal with another entity that you like to receive information from, like ESPN, for example, and you wanted to be able to download and watch sports and get information at a certain fast speed from that entity providing the information, if you're both on the same network, you would get that information at the higher speed. If you were not on the same network, AT&T might say, well, sorry, ESPN is not part of our network, so you either can't get that information or we're going to throttle it and bring it to you at a much lower speed. Or conversely, ESPN might tell you, sorry, you're not using the Disney Go network, the Disney network, or you're not using one of our affiliates, you're using AT&T and we don't get along with them, so you can't view our content unless you, excuse me, unless you use our recommended internet service providers, which are down at layer 2. I'm not talking about up here at layer 5. A lot of people get this confused with, well, if I want to watch The Mandalorian, I have to register and get an account on Disney.com and stream on Disney. That's not the same thing. That's at layer 5 up here. I'm talking about down here at layer 2 and layer 3, your physical internet connection. So with net neutrality, if it was in place, and it's not really a thing right now, and a lot of companies argue that No, net neutrality should not be a thing. In other words, you should allow content providers to make deals with network providers or internet providers so that they can give customers better deals. And I know some of you experience this, like you sign up for Sprint or Verizon or AT&T, specifically cellular services, which are data services, and you get to stream certain services for free or at a faster rate because they've made a deal with Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or whoever it is they've made a deal with. So most end users and most individuals would say, no, the internet is a utility and you cannot throttle and can't prevent me from getting certain data from certain places. So there's pros and cons to both sides of it. You generally, the large companies say that, no, you should allow us to discriminate. And the individuals who want internet for free, cheap to free, said, no, you should not discriminate. You should allow me to get access to stuff regardless of whatever network I'm on. Now, if it's public data, that's different. But if it's commercial data, I kind of tend to lean towards the company side. I think that you should allow companies to be able to sign content deals, because ultimately that will lower the price of everything because they'll be in competition with each other. There is a possibility that will create a vertical market in some cases, but there's already a lot of vertical markets that have been created because of the dedicatedness of our internet service now. Really where we need to be looking is up here at the application layer. And as long as we've got lots and lots of choices at the application layer, it doesn't matter so much lower down. So let's say you don't want to pay Disney to watch The Mandalorian. Don't watch it. Watch something else. You don't want to pay CBS All Access to watch the latest Star Trek, the Jean-Luc Picard saga. I don't know if it's that good or not. I'm not going to pay for it. I'll wait 2 or 3 years and wait till it's on Netflix for free. And that's what most of you guys are doing. You're just waiting a couple years. Like Ozark, that was a really popular series. It's on Netflix. So as long as you have a Netflix account, or as long as you're borrowing your ex-girlfriend's Netflix account, like some of us do, then you can watch it for free. I don't mind waiting a couple years. Here's a couple more things I just want to mention in chapter 10 here. Internet 2. And first of all, I need you to know who the NSF is if you don't already know, the National Science Foundation. It's a large organization funded partly by the federal government, partly by endowments and foundations to basically better mankind through scientific innovation. They fund a lot of things. They fund the Project Blue Book, which was the search for little green men. They fund the Hubble telescope, things like that. They fund a lot of things. They're funding, one of the things that they are funding is basically a new backbone, a new internet that we call Internet 2. So this project, which was started, Internet 2 has been around since 1996. It's not very big yet, but it is getting there. It's used by more than 500 organizations, and these organizations are primarily universities. Some of them are research organizations and endowments and public broadcasting networks. And what they're trying to do is basically create a better backbone, because our current backbone, I showed you that backbone map earlier of the United States. It's messy, and it was left up to the carriers to decide who should connect to what. So AT&T and Verizon and Xfinity and Level 3 and CenturyTel and all these different tier 1 carriers, they were the ones that kind of decided, hey man, you want to sign a contract with me and we'll connect up in Dallas and San Francisco or whatever. They kind of grew that. But Internet 2 is made up of research organizations and universities. University of Houston is part of Internet 2. We're the end users, not the carriers. we can probably, well, we do definitely benefit from being able to structurally create a better internet backbone in order to get data back and forth faster. So it's a combination of a few things. It's a combination of physical layer protocols, which involve fiber, data link layer protocols, which are faster than the current data link layer protocols, IP version 6, and other internet protocols, which are not IP, they're different layer protocols for the purpose of transferring data to different nodes on the internet faster. So as you can see, we've got nodes here in Houston and in Galveston here, because UT's in Galveston's part of it, Dallas. Now, the data traveling on these blue lines might be IP version 6, it might be something else. And then Internet 2 nodes can potentially then connect to IP version 4 or traditional networks, as it does with the University of Houston Internet 2 node. But it's basically a faster interstate highway system. So consider this. Everybody's familiar with the United States interstate highway system. We have I-10 and I-20 and I-69 and these interstates that go all over the country. There is a specific speed limit on these interstates. I think the maximum speed limit in the United States, I think, is 75, might be 80. But pretend that this is a new interstate system, and it's not a toll road system because this is supposedly free for anybody that wants to join it. But its speed limit is 300. It's a much faster speed limit, but you have to drive special cars on it. So not just anybody can throw their traffic onto Internet 2. You have to have the right kind of hardware and the right kind of protocols and be approved by the other members of Internet 2 in order to join it. And there are similar initiatives going on in other countries, many of which are wireless. For example, there's something like this going on in India, but they are using the 5G network. There's a couple of billionaires in India that want to make India a better place to live. So they're spending a lot of their own money to improve and roll out 5G networking in India to try to get the Indian backbone infrastructure up to par, because it's, although they do have a lot of internet there and there are a lot of tech companies there, their internet infrastructure is very poor. It's far behind. So go Google for Internet 2, make sure you know who Internet 2 is. It's just, bear in mind, test 3, exam 3 is all multiple choice. So you don't have to do a lot of research on these things. You just have to do enough research to where if you were presented with 5 multiple choice answers, you'd be able to pick the right one out of them. So I'm not asking you to write essays on who is Internet 2 and who developed it, why is it better, and net neutrality and the theories and issues of net neutrality, and do you believe in it or not. In terms of implications for management, the internet is continuing to increase capacity, not just because of the number of users. There are 2 main factors that cause and are driving the increase in capacity, or needed capacity, I should say, for the internet. One of them is the amount of people that potentially can use it and want to use it, but also it's the amount of data, or that's not really the right thing to say, the amount of available services that you can access on the internet. That's what really is increasing the need for better infrastructure and faster internet. These days, if you call Xfinity and say, I want an internet account, and you're new, let's say you're moving into an apartment, they'll ask you a series of questions, and they'll say, well, do you plan to do a lot of streaming, or do you have a Netflix account, or how many people are in your home? You know, how do you receive your news information or your video? How are you watching TV if you watch TV? They ask these questions and they try to make recommendations, which they claim are all, their recommendations are usually way overreaching. But depending on the number of people in your house and whether you have school-age kids, that's another thing they'll ask you. Do you have school-age children? If you have 3 or 4 school-age children, you probably need higher bandwidth so they can all engage in 3 or 4 separate Zoom meetings at one time. All of the things that we used to do not on the internet, we do on the internet now. We do everything on the internet now, including what we're doing right now, teaching classes, ordering pizzas, having birthday parties, having weddings. Has anybody attended an internet Zoom wedding yet? I attended a Zoom wedding already. Kind of sad, but that's where we're at. Zoom graduation. Did anybody attend any Zoom high school graduations? I attended one of those. Again, kind of sad because I feel bad for the seniors, graduating seniors of this era, this year, because, you know, their school got interrupted during spring break, and maybe that's some of you guys right now, but you know, you don't get to do that walk that you thought you were going to get to do. It's a virtual walk, or if it is a walk, you know, you're sitting 6 feet away and you can't hug anybody. And so, but what that's done is that's really caused the need for having better internet. And contrary to popular beliefs or beliefs in general, the internet's not available to everybody, even within this country. There's a large percentage of people at or below the poverty level that there are programs in place to give them free cheese and milk and food stamps and health care and things like that, and, or reduced services. There are not a lot of good public official programs in place to provide internet access. Yes, there are entities like Xfinity and AT&T and some of the internet providers and some of the cellular providers are providing because they're just trying to be nice, but they're not being required by any government edict, at least in the United States, to give somebody internet service and expect to get paid back by the federal government. So that kind of regulation is in the works. I don't know if we'll see anything until we see our next president, by the way. But just like healthcare for all, internet for all, that's a big deal. And I believe at this point that the internet definitely is a utility. We can't survive comfortably without having internet. Not even comfortably. It would be like going and living in a cave or a tent at this point. Just like we need water, just like we need electricity, we need internet. So it's become a big deal. And this whole virus thing that we're suffering through right now is just bringing to light a lot of the realities of the fact. Like, I'll give you a good example. Fort Bend ISD, which is where I live, Fort Bend County, 77,000 students. The school had to, the school district had to shut down basically for the rest of the semester, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for the next semester, but they had to figure out how are they going to provide, because they are a public school district. They are required by law to provide education to the public, to anybody that meets the criteria. They're a child and they need education. And our taxes pay for that. You can't discriminate for that. So the discrimination comes because they say, okay, we're going to teach all of our classes online now. Well, wait a minute, what about the 20,000 kids in Fort Bend County, which is, it's a high level, whose parents don't have the money for a laptop or a computer or internet services, or maybe they have one laptop or one computer at home, but there's 9 kids living at home. How are 9 kids supposed to use one computer to take classes online? Public school. It's not possible. So one of the things that Fort Bend ISD did is they had about 26,000 laptops that were deployed, and I actually talked to them a little, I consulted them on this. 26,000 laptops deployed in the schools. I said, take all of those laptops that are sitting in the kiosks out of the schools and give them to the students. Now, there's a lot of issues with that. Like, they're not going to get a lot of them back, or a lot of them are going to get broken, and they may not be able to get federal, or it's state, it's not federal, it's state. They will probably not be able to get as much state money back to recover the costs for that. But believe me, there are lobbyists in Austin now, or if not later, that will be working for the school districts to try to say, hey, look, you know, we had to spend a lot of money to teach online based on what you guys told us we had to do. You said, you know, Governor the governor, you said, you know, all the schools had to be closed, or the county commissioner said all the schools had to be closed. So we need extra money to teach the kids at home in order to not be in violation of our charter as a public school, in order to provide education to the kids. So it's a big problem right now, but somebody's got to pay for it. Ultimately, it's going to be you and me paying for it. Our taxes probably in the next couple of years here are going to go up. All taxes are going to go up. Sales tax, property tax, income tax. It's all going to go up because we have to pay for this huge bubble that we're in right now. Mobile internet access is rapidly growing, disrupting the ISP market. That's not really true anymore because all ISPs, I mean, there's only a few wired ISPs. And some of you don't have wired ISP services at all and never will. A lot of people will just only have wireless, which is fine. If you're a bachelor living in an apartment, you don't need to spend $50 a month on Comcast when you've already got it on your cell phone. Just turn your cell phone into a mobile hotspot temporarily, or you can use one of these. Anybody have one of these little, it's a little like a credit card size thing, almost a little bit bigger than a credit card. I've got unlimited. I pay about $30 a month for this. Basically, it's like a cell phone, but it's unlimited. I can carry it around and connect up to 8 devices to it wherever I am, as long as I'm within range of a cell tower that services Sprint or T-Mobile. Cellular modem. The Fort Bend ISD handed a lot of those out. The ones that they had, they took them away from the teachers and they said, hey, we need to use these. They were like backups. They were basically intended for the teachers, and they gave them to students because the students said, great, you gave us a laptop. We don't have internet access, or the internet access we have is too slow for these Zoom meetings. So we'll continue talking about that in the next class. We are definitely going to have a class tomorrow. I'll try to get through all of chapter 11 tomorrow, and we'll finish chapter 12 on Monday, although chapter 12, the security chapter, there's probably a lot more to that than 2 hours worth of class. So I'm going to end up having to truncate some of exam 3, but just if it makes you feel better, exam 3, in my opinion, is not going to be as hard. There will be no multiple choice. Exam 2, as soon as I finish with my next class here, I'll make it available for you. Right now, what I think you guys should be doing is paying attention to the exam 2 study notes, paying attention to the subnetting assignment. You can, again, submit that even though it was supposed to have been due already. If you messed up on it, I regraded a couple, and a couple of you didn't do very well at it, resubmit it again. I want you to get it right. Okay, so I'll see you guys tomorrow, hopefully at 2. And hopefully I'll have a lot more of this stuff graded for you. Keep sending me emails. Let's not worry about the Wireshark right now. Okay, don't worry about getting that Wireshark stuff working. I'll probably send something out this weekend for it, since we're running into some technical issue on it. I thought we had a couple more days than we actually have. So see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.